This video contains scenes which some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. How's it going, you guys? Homegrown Patriot back here again with another video for you today. This is that brain tanning video that I promised you guys. I hope you guys enjoy it. This is going to be a two-part video just because of the length. I'm going into quite a bit of detail here, so sit back and relax, and I hope you guys enjoy it. After you skin the animal out, you're going to want to flesh that pelt or hide. Just get as much of that meat or fat off of that pelt as possible, because that's going to be what causes it to spoil in the end. You can use a bucket of water to do this as well, but being able to lay that pelt out is going to help a lot with the washing process. Alright guys, so I'm about to wash these pelts. I bought some Pantene shampoo, so these are going to be some high quality pelts. I chose this because it's mostly, I didn't want something super hard, so this is a pretty soft shampoo overall. I just want to clean the hair and make sure that there's no blood or any fat residue left over from the flushing process. Alright, you guys saw just a second ago that it looked like I grabbed them out of the freezer, and that's what I did. It's a personal preference for me. I like to freeze my pelts. One, the pelt won't spoil at all if it's frozen, and two, it'll also help kill any parasites like ticks or fleas. After I'm done washing that pelt, I'll hang it up. You see here I hung this one from the nose. That ensures that that hair is pointing down so that the water can drain out easily. That's the biggest thing, is just having the hair pointing down to where it'll just drain right off of that pelt. I'll also fluff that hair up just a little bit to help air get in there and help further dry that pelt a little bit. At this point, you're just wanting to get the excess water off. You don't want these pelts to completely dry hanging like this, because then you won't get a good stretch. But you want to get as much water out of these pelts as you can, and then we can continue on to the stretching process. Once my pelts stopped dripping extra water, I was pretty much ready to stretch them. I built a stretcher just by screwing a couple boards together. The one thing that I wish that I hadn't done is I built this stretcher pretty big, and I actually fixed it later. You guys will see later I shrunk it down quite a bit. You don't want it too large because you're just going to be wasting a ton of line, but you want it large enough to where that pelt can stretch. So you need to have enough room on the edges to where it will stretch well. The first thing that I do when I go to stretch these pelts out is I will anchor the top and the bottom of the pelt to that stretcher first. Doesn't matter if it's a coyote pelt, deer pelt, buffalo pelt, I anchor the top and the bottom first. This is going to help keep that hide secure while you're working. And I'm poking about 1/2 inch holes in this all the way around, roughly 2 inches apart. So you get really good stretch all the way around. While I'm actually working this line through and stretching this thing out, I'm working from the inside out. That way I don't feed any extra hair through the wrong way. You could lose some hair doing that. I'm going from the flesh side to the hair side. When you're finished, you're going to end up with something that looks pretty much like this right here. Once I finished stretching the pelt, I flipped it over and I started fluffing the hair a little bit more just to help get any extra moisture out. As it's drying, if the hair is matted up, it's not going to dry very quickly, so fluffing it back up, if you had a comb or something like that as well, that would help a lot. But just fluffing it every once in a while as it dries is going to help that pelt dry quickly. While I'm doing this, I'm also looking for any small burrs or anything that I may have missed before the flushing process. I'm going to pull those out so I don't have to deal with them later. Alright, for me, day 2 was pretty much just membraning these pelts out. I'm just barely scraping any residual fat off, but really what you're going for is you want to scrape that pelt up a little bit. I'm using a really sharp knife to do this. You don't want to use a dull knife because you'll be pressing too hard and you could actually poke through that pelt if you're not careful. But if you keep that knife at a 90-degree angle and just scrape down like I'm doing here, you'll be totally fine. I pay really close attention to the face because the face can be kind of difficult to flesh out on the fleshing beam. I also pay really close attention to the edges of the pelt because the edges tend to be thinner. Where it wraps around the animal's stomach, it can be quite a bit thinner in that area, so you want to be very careful putting pressure on that and make sure you're maintaining that 90-degree angle with your knife. Scraping the pelt like this does two things. It removes the membrane or any fat left over, and it also will prep the pelt to where it will absorb the brain mixture a lot easier in our next step. If your pelt has a face on it, you need to make sure that you remove the cartilage from the ears. This is a very important step due to the fact that if it's left in, it will eventually spoil and you will essentially lose those ears. Pretty simple task, just cut to where you can get a good grip and then gently pull, and essentially the back of the ear will peel off of that cartilage and you'll be left with the skin itself. After that, you can simply pin these forward and let them dry. Alright you guys, now that our pelts are almost dry, we're ready to move on to the next step, which is actually removing the brain from the skull of the animal, and then later on we can come back to the brain and actually start mixing it to where we can use it to actually help tan and soften these pelts. A cool fact is that pretty much every animal in the world has enough tannin in its own brain to tan its own hide. So if you take the skull from whatever animal you shoot, I think there's one animal that it actually does not have enough tannin in it, and I think it's a buffalo. It does not have enough tannin in it to purify its own hide. There's a couple different ways of doing it, and a method that I actually like to use is I actually use compressed air to do it. A lot of people will cut the skull off, like cut the top of the skull, and that works just fine. If you want to do that, that's totally fine. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use compressed air to essentially blow this brain out of the skull into a bag that I can hold on to and keep for later. Once you guys have checked that skull, made sure it's completely empty, you are ready to go on to the next step. Alright you guys, so we got this hide off of the stretcher today. It looks really nice right now. I actually combed it out a couple days ago and got all of the burrs and anything out that I don't want on there. I got that all combed out. It's super soft, very nice pelt. This hide looks really nice. It's got really nice hair on it. We've had some pretty cold weather here in Washington lately. It hasn't warmed up quite yet. Today is actually one of the warmest days that we've had so far this year. So the coyotes are still holding on to that winter coat, which is super nice. There are two ways that I've softened hides in the past, whether it be a deer hide, cow hide, or smaller game like a coyote, raccoon, things like that. One is you can actually leave it on the stretcher and use a stick of some sort to actually work the hide on the stretcher. I've found that works really well with bigger hides, but for something that's smaller, kind of like a coyote and other small game, I like to take it off of the stretcher. That way I can use my hands to actually break this over my knee and just pulling it in my hands and working it like that until it's dry. At this point in the process, we're ready to move on to mixing the brain and actually start applying this to the hide and let it soak to where we can start breaking it here pretty shortly. I add just a little bit of water and I heat this mixture just a little bit over the stove. I don't want to get it too hot because you'll actually start to break down the oil in that brain. So get it just a little bit warm, and then this will help it absorb really well into the pelt. You don't see it at all on the video, but I actually added an egg yolk to this mixture as well. You don't want to heat the egg yolk, but I added it after I spread everything around, and this will help soften it even more. All right, when you guys are applying the mixture to your pelt, make sure that you get it all over, get it on the edges and everything. Try to avoid getting it on the hair side as much as possible. I mean, realistically, you're gonna probably get some on the hair, and it's not the biggest deal in the world. You'll just clean it out later with water. When I'm done applying it, I will fold in the edges of the pelt and I'll roll it together so that it's a small bundle basically. And I'll put it inside a bag, and I personally leave it in a cold place for about 12 to 24 hours is what I'm looking for. I'm basically just waiting until that pelt is ready to be worked. You'll know it's ready when it's pretty pliable. You want it to be very, very loose and easy to stretch and pull apart. Now for the working process. 12 to 24 hours later, you should have a pretty well saturated pelt and you're ready to start the softening of this. It's a pretty simple process. It helps a lot if you have two people as well. Getting people on it and stretching it apart. You're looking to pull this thing until it's completely dry. You don't want to stop until it's dry to the touch. You can touch it to your lip as well and see if there's any moisture left in it. If you get it soft and it's still got moisture in it and you let it sit and completely dry, it's gonna get hard again. Remember that the edges are the thinnest part, so they are going to dry fastest. So work those really, really well, and then you can start working in as those get drier. You can see here that these fibers are starting to break apart, and you just keep on working it. This is what it's pretty much gonna look like. You're gonna get that nice leather look to it. So last night I finished up softening this pelt. As you can see, it's very, very pliable. This is a super nice pelt. I'm very excited about how it turned out. All I have to do now is I'm gonna sew those holes up that you guys saw. You can see I've still got a couple bullet holes and things in here, or one bullet hole, and then a couple tears that happened while I was fleshing it out. But I'm gonna sew those up, and then what I'll do is I'll sew the belly back together, so I'll make a tube, and that'll be preparing it for the smoke. The smoke is what's going to actually permeate the hide, and it'll waterproof all of these little fibers that interlock and create this hide. That's how it keeps it from becoming hard again. Here you guys can see the finished product, or almost finished product. I also trimmed the edges of this pelt to remove those holes that we made for stretching, and this just helps clean up that pelt a little bit more. Here you can see that I also sewed up those holes, and if you do it correctly, I was making sure to pull all the hair through. Try to avoid getting any hair on the inside, but if you do it right, you can it's pretty hard to find them from the hair side of the pelt. Obviously you could if you really tried, but it's just makes it a little bit cleaner.